I'm not sure that I'm entirely within my comfort zone. I'm not a climatologist. I'm a farmer. I was catching lambs last night. We had a lot of lambs being born in the last few weeks. Our walk-in freezer went out, and so I was doing refrigeration. We had the trucks leaving. I had to organize spraying on our almonds to get some foliar boost to our blooms, so to prevent issues with fungus and different diseases. So there's a lot of things that happen that make me a farmer and not particularly a climatologist, but I am subject to the changes here that we've been talking about today. Whole Valley Farm has been active for about 30 years, looking for kind of longer-term patterns that begin to think about the agricultural and agronomic practices that farmers have been doing for many, many years that I think have been fairly destructive and actually have been contributing to global warming in many ways. California is incredibly complex. I think if you understand the dimensions of California agriculture, there's about 100 million acres in California. About 26 million of that is either farms or ranches, where cattle are grazed, or there's about 10 million acres that is actually irrigated agriculture in California. Though they produce a wide variety of crops. There's 400 or so different commodities produced in California, shipped worldwide. It's an incredible engine in California's economy. It's about $400 million in actual, or $40 billion, in actual production and trade that come from California farms. So it's an important part of the economy. It's certainly an important part of the land use patterns that we have here. I think what Dana showed on the slide there about water and snowpack and the impacts of California agriculture are being felt immediately. There are communities, it's kind of dependent upon where you are and what the resources are around you that allow you to weather this last year, where January, February's temperatures were incredibly warm and continue to be a trend that we see this year and the year before. So we had 3 years here where farmers like myself were hoping to get chilling hours for our fruit trees that were planted, and with the understanding that we have about 400 to 600 chilling hours in order to be able to have those trees senesce and produce a solid bloom that will in fact set fruit. We're not getting the chilling hours, so we're seeing that. We're seeing impacts in terms of how much water is available. The creek riparian area that we're on this last year, and the irrigation district that serves Yolo County farmers, had 0 water deliveries. Farmers in Fremont Water District down near Fresno had 0 water deliveries in a system where they had been incredibly dependable for the last 50 years. A lot of farmers in the southern San Joaquin had 5 or 10% of the water that they normally get. And frankly, you can't grow crops without water. You can grow winter crops at times. You can grow things in a season where you don't need so much water, where there's not so much transpiration, evaporation, but the vineyards, orchards, permanent crops, and the crops that we come to depend on, you simply can't grow without water. So that's, I think, important to realize that the impacts are going to be huge. There's impacts in terms of migrations of pests from warmer areas to colder areas, where the frosts and other things have taken care of those pests, and the impacts of those pests in the past. Those things are beginning to move north, and those impacts are being seen. So agriculture has indeed been going to see tremendous change. Everything from, there's predictions that perhaps the Napa Valley will not be able to grow wine grapes there in the way they do now, if these trends continue. So I think we have to begin to think about the impacts to California agriculture and the impacts to a food system that all of us have taken for granted. I think Mary asked me to come talk because I'm not sure how many farmers Mary knows. If you looked around this room, maybe all of you could count on your hand how many farmers you actually know. We've kind of created a system, I think, that we have to be a little bit more introspective about, in that we've separated our agricultural production from the reality of what comes onto your table. And we've not learned that we have to be paying more attention to that productivity, and we haven't paid attention to it, I think by and large because there's not been any blips. It's been incredibly abundant. It's grown as we've grown as a culture and a society. It's helped build San Francisco, the ability of these fantastic soils and this abundant water to make food that's cheap, available, and without question some of the best in the world. We've taken advantage of that. That's something that we have come to grow and expect. That expectation, I think, is also part of agriculture's reality right now. Farmers are having a hard time thinking about how they adjust to climate change. I talked to some farmers this last week and said, what do you think of climate change? I said, well, you know, we're going to adapt. It'll be what it's going to be. But I have to farm knowing what I know and minimizing risks, and I have to make my decisions for this year based on the technologies I've already got in the pipeline, the markets that I've got my system set up for, and the realities of what's going to come around the pipe. If it doesn't rain in March and we're limited on water, well, perhaps we're going to be like every other farmer getting on a list to drill another well. And the reaction, I think, in the San Joaquin, which is a non-sustainable reaction, all of these curves that you're seeing that head in the wrong way are, and trend lines are certainly looking at San Joaquin County water, and the water in the southern San Joaquin is on an unsustainable trend, where farmers are drilling wells that are deeper, the water quality is becoming less dependable, and in fact they're going to a place where they're creating a desert through their actions, and because they've become so dependent on Sierra snowpack and other things that have delivered the water that they needed. I think every aspect of California agriculture, if you look at the dark parts on those maps, is bound to be touched. Okay, so what do we do? Well, your action here, and I wish that at a Farm Bureau meeting they'd be singing "This Land Is Your Land," and there was a camaraderie that you folks have there, and I'm hoping 2 years from now when you get your action passed, and you have a carbon tax, that you'll turn your attention to the food system. Because the food system needs a tremendous amount of what you have right here, which is an incredible intelligence in this community that's looking at a problem, organizing, beginning to look for solutions, and being very specific in terms of the actions that you take to change the course of the trajectory that we're on. So we could use you in the food system. So if I were to think about how agriculture can actually change the dynamic in the conversation right now, if you look at greenhouse gas emissions from agriculture in California, about 80% comes from either livestock, methane production, or nitrogen fertilizer that turns into nitrous oxide. That's a very, very potent greenhouse gas. So it's methane and nitrous oxide, 80%. It's not the trucking, it's not the tractors, it's not the fossil fuel consumption in the field, it's those two things. If you throw in water pumping, moving the water from the south or from the north to the south and getting it to fields and things, it's another. It's 20% of the energy used in California is actually water pumping. Tremendous amount.
And a lot of that comes from the dams in the Sierras, which are in that water down.
Well, that's right. So now you're looking at another trend that begins to build on itself. If the dams don't have water, our hydropower is not there, and suddenly it becomes more expensive to pump. But farmers are caught in that system because their livelihood depends upon their putting a crop in the ground, optimizing production, or maximizing production, and then going into a market and finding a place to sell that production. I'd like to talk a little bit about why our farm, I think, is different, and why it's important that we begin to rethink this, not only the action that you're taking, or think about the action you're taking, but think about potential actions in the future about how agriculture can actually be an important place to sequester carbon. We tend to think, there was a great paper that was done by UC Law Center that kind of outlined what are the issues in agriculture where farmers are prohibited from adapting new technologies. For example, the methane from those cows can be digested, right? You can make energy out of that. I have some figures on the net there is that we can offset the cost of the carbon that's released by producing methane and creating power. And that the equivalence there in what's potential in terms of biogas and biomass in California is about 46 million barrels of oil. Okay, tremendous amount. And what's powering that? Well, agriculture is powered by something that farmers take for granted, sunlight, right? And if you combine sunlight with plant and the ability for plants to be photosynthesized, what they're doing is taking CO2 from the air with water and sunlight, and putting that carbon into plant tissue. That becomes your food that powers you. That's a carbon source for all of you. but it's also carbon that can be sequestered in soil. Most farmers do farming very different than what we do. We think that we can, and agriculture can, it's been shown that agriculture can actually remediate some of the carbon growth by changing the practices that they employ. And those practices mean optimizing the amount of sunlight harvest, optimizing the amount of carbon sequestration, tilling less, because every time you till, you're releasing carbon dioxide into the air. Looking at new ways to manage livestock, livestock on pasture or fed a different diet. Stonyfield Yogurt has done a study with farmers to feed a high omega-3 diet to cows. It's more expensive, but it reduces the methane production by 12 to 18%. Pretty amazing. But it puts more omega-3s in the milk. So there's ways that we can start to think about some of the problems and begin to create solutions where agriculture can actually be an industry that is critical to the mitigation of increasing CO2 levels in the air, or greenhouse gas in the air, and we can actually begin to sequester more carbon. But we have to change our practices. Where have we come from, and why do farmers do what they do? Well, I mean, I think if you look at California's settlement and the settlement of the U.S., people who came to this country found an incredibly vast resource, an abundant resource, and they were by and large poor. There were no rules. You can just go out there and plow it up, turn it over. The water was there, the resources were there, and basically we built a whole agricultural system on this abundance. And the idea that it was extractable, it was easy, it's something that you could exploit and no one gave a damn about it. They drained, for God's sakes, they drained the Tulare Basin. They just drained it. And they made it some of the most productive farmland in the world. But nobody said you can't. They did it. That was the Boswells and the Salyers and the folks who became cotton barons and the kings of agriculture in California. But there were no rules. And now you're hitting a point where we have to begin to redefine how we do even the most fundamental parts of agriculture, I believe. And that means that we have to look at ways that we till less. We sequester more carbon. We look to have biological systems that are enhanced by the process of growing food, rather than look at it as an extractive economy where you're tweaking the edges. Farmers will tweak the edges. So how are they adapting now? Well, they're drilling wells, but they're making sure the water goes further by using micro sprinklers and other things that deliver water to the crops. They're looking to maximize their production within a limited range of resources that allow them to do that. They're looking at fertilization, utilization technologies that allow them to micro-apply fertilizer so they have less nitrous oxide that goes from their farm. They're looking at new ways where they can employ drones and other things, exotic things out there that are kind of sexy technologies that are completely ridiculous. They're looking to modify genetically the structure of a plant so that perhaps it might be more resistant to disease, more resistant to some of the pests that are coming, more resistant perhaps to drought. I have a real problem with that technology, but I think that there's a tremendous momentum there. But they're looking for ways that they can adapt. But whether they'll be able to change the curve here, and again, whether we'll be able to muster the public investment back in agriculture to help farmers adapt and create new pathways so that they can become more effective with the resources that fall on the ground is really critical. There was a part of the graph here, or part of the chart here on water is just infiltration. So when we grow a cover crop, and come up to our farm, it looks different than any farm in Yolo County right now, because we're growing a tremendous amount of cover crop that is carbon, that we'll be able to put back onto the ground, and we're looking to cover that ground and keep that nutrient layer up high, where that becomes basically a mulch for the soil. You have less transpiration, you have more water infiltration, you have more biological life. The plants that you're growing are able to pull in more nutrients to make a healthier plant. Those systems should be no-brainers. But until we get the Farm Bureau singing along with "This Land Is Your Land," they're not going to see it because they're locked into a pattern of production with the tools they know to help them minimize risk in a very, very competitive marketplace. Yeah.
Have we approached, Wales might know, the Farm Bureau to see if there's any possibility they could support our carbon theme?
I think that's for some of your organizers to answer. I think, yes, they're trying to engage Farm Bureau. I think Paul Wenger might have been invited here or tried to be contacted, but he's the president of California Farm Bureau. California Farm Bureau's position right now is that because we're not getting as much snowpack, we need to catch more rainwater and build more dams and more facilities to gather rainwater. That's a tenable position, but I think it's not the solution. I think we in fact need to rethink some of the ways we farm. Yeah.
So I assume you're not big ag, you're a little guy, right?
We farm about 400 acres.
Okay. What can we do to reach out to independent farmers and even big ag to get them to understand what we're doing with the revenue neutral carbon agreement, to get them to understand that, and then to respond to their concerns? Because it'll never fly if this bill that we want is going to put them at a competitive disadvantage, say, with foreign producers that don't have it. So I think there's a lot of dialogue and education and feedback that we need from you guys so that we can make this palatable, get the farmers with us, because without them, nothing's going to move.
Well, I think so did you hear that question? It's how do you approach the agricultural industry? And there, the gal from Fresno here said, well, there's a lot of conservatives down there where we're at. I think you find a way that you bridge those. You're basically the translators. You're talking a new language, and you know the old language, and you're trying to develop a new language, and you know the way to bridge that. I think is through the intelligence that you're providing and the information you're trying to provide, and trying to get this subject raised to a level where farmers are paying attention. I'm not sure I have the complete answer there, but I think that, and in talking to some farmers, the cap and trade, for example, they'll work with CARB and they talk to CARB about how cap and trade might affect their tomato cannery. My brother's the president of a tomato cannery in Woodland. In talking to CARB, and they were saying, you need to achieve these goals, and here's your cap. He said, well, what credit do you give us for the fact that most of our tomatoes come from within about 30 miles? And we're a very local cannery, so our trucking costs are lower, our energy costs are lower. And they said, well, basically you might want to move to Nevada because they wouldn't have that cap there, and you could just truck your tomatoes there. It would be easy. So there's a lot of mistrust and I'm almost done. A lot of mistrust of big solutions. And I think you have to figure out how agriculture doesn't become a weak child or weak sister in this whole exchange, because agricultural commodities move worldwide. And almonds may be really good right now, but in fact Turkey will have almonds, South Africa will have almonds, Australia will grow them. And farmers here will be really, really hurt. This is a really interesting, complex, vast subject. There's a lot of investment going on right now in California agriculture from non-farmers. Investment hedge funds, TIAA Craft has 37,000 acres of almonds. They're not farmers. They are investors. And the destructive cycle, looking at farmland as an investment and not as a resource to be stewarded, is a fast track to, I won't say hell, but pretty close.